That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so let's go through and let's look at these wide receivers moving up my rest of season rankings. I mean, these are players that look like they could be potential league winners, especially for the fantasy football playoffs. But let's do something a little bit different for this video. I know that we've been very proud of all the success that everybody in the flock has had this season, but I know that not everybody is locked into their fantasy playoffs right now. So please, and I repeat, please, regardless of your record, so we can get a good feel of where the entire community stands right now, can you go to the comment section, just leave what your record is. You don't have to commentate over it. You don't have to tell me what injuries you had. Everybody's dealing with injuries. Please let me just see those records down below so we can scroll through and get a good idea of how y'all have done so far this season. And of course, before we get into anything, we have to give away some Fantasy Flock Network hats. Don't have one near me, but we're going to be giving them away to Ethan and a linebacker Caleb in this video. Thank you all for supporting the channel. Every time you go down there, drop that like, leave a comment. You get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. So please make sure you continue to do that. And also, lastly, if you want to support this channel, go sign up for Underdog Fantasy and use promo code FLOCK over there on Underdog Fantasy. They have player props that you can go bet on every single week. This past week, I just lost a decent amount of money, to be completely honest, betting on those player props over there on Underdog Fantasy. They also have drafts that you can get in at the same time as well. And you don't have to be a loser like me, because if you go and you sign up and you use promo code FLOCK, you're an automatic winner because they match your first deposit 100% up to $100. So you deposit $100, they add another $100 into your account, and you're sitting there with $200. So please take advantage of that ASAP. And yeah, let's go through. Let's dive into these wide receivers. Let's lead it off with someone who was the wide receiver 1 overall this past week, Justin Jefferson. Now with Jefferson, hard to go through and say that he is some massive winner and that he can rise that much more up in our rankings. I mean, if you're looking at where we have him in our rankings now, I do have Justin Jefferson as the wide receiver 3. Now, we already had him as that top 5 option previously. And remember back in the day when people used to hate on us for having Justin Jefferson at the wide receiver 4 spot, when a lot of other people had him down there as a low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2, when he struggled at the middle part of this season. But over the past month, I mean, nobody has come close to Justin Jefferson with the role that he has had in Minnesota. Over the past month, you've seen 11, 10, 9, and 14 targets. Now, of course, the reason he gets the 14 targets this past week, and of course, the reason that he is sliding up past Tyreek Hill in my rest of season rankings here, is that with Justin Jefferson, you are no longer dealing with Adam Thielen in Minnesota. Now, with Jefferson, it's very intriguing to see the profile that he has had in 2020 and in 2021, because if you're tracking the volume versus the touchdown rate for Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson has been operating as the wide receiver 1 here for a very long time, yet Adam Thielen has been the wide receiver coming away with just touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. You see this with Justin Jefferson in 2020, 113 targets, 7 receiving touchdowns. And if we look at this season so far, let's remove this past week. If you remove this past week because Adam Thielen did miss, Justin Jefferson has only had 6 touchdowns so far this season. I mean, that's with over 100 targets at the same time. That touchdown rate for Justin Jefferson has historically been pretty low in this Minnesota Vikings offense. And there's a clear reason for that. It's not that Justin Jefferson isn't some great wide receiver. It's not that Justin Jefferson isn't one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. I mean, we've had him as our dynasty wide receiver 1 overall for quite a while now. It's that with Adam Thielen, he's a pretty good option in the red zone. They're going through and they draw up plays. I mean, everybody knows this by now. You don't need me to say this, but they go through and they specifically draw up plays just designed for Adam Thielen once they get inside the 10-yard line. And here with Adam Thielen, you see this season where he had 92 targets and 10 receiving touchdowns. The season prior, I mean, if you're looking at Adam Thielen, something very similar here where he had 103 targets and 14 receiving touchdowns. So he is essentially doubling the touchdown rate of what you have with Justin Jefferson. And it's not because he's getting lucky with these long ball touchdowns. It's because that is schemed into the Minnesota Vikings offense. Adam Thielen is one of the very rare players. Talk about this all the time. Very rarely can you look at someone and know that their touchdown rate will be higher than league average. Guys like that are legitimately Adam Thielen, Devonte Adams, And I'd love to know your opinion on the next guy, because I can't even think of another wide receiver, because we know the best thing you do. Volume, volume, volume. That's what you're chasing here. These touchdown rates are going to be fluky, except in the case of Adam Thielen, because of the role that he has in the red zone. Well, now, this role in the red zone, yes, you're going to get a bump up from KJ Osborne. You're going to get a bump up from Tyler Conklin. But, I mean, they're not all of a sudden going to be going up and making up for the 14 receiving touchdowns Adam Thielen's on pace for. Instead, that's going to be bumping up what you have with Justin Jefferson. So Jefferson not only is going to be seeing more targets per game in Minnesota, which of course is nice, but with Justin Jefferson, he's already getting targeted at a very high rate. It's not necessarily like Justin Jefferson can increase his role that much further in Minnesota. He's already an alpha X wide receiver here, going through and dominating the target share. But what's very impactful with Justin Jefferson is now you're going to see the role change a little bit in the red zone. At least I'm expecting for the role to go through and change in the red zone, because this team really doesn't have that many other options, and they have that significant hole now. So with Jefferson, I think you have to bump him up. We have him as our wide receiver 3. I think you take Cooper Kupp, Devonte Adams over Justin Jefferson. Outside of that, give me Jefferson over Tyreek Hill. The only other wide receiver that's outproduced Justin Jefferson on a points per game basis so far this season is Debo Samuel. Debo Samuel's currently dealing with an injury, so there's no way in hell that you could have Justin Jefferson behind Debo. I mean, even if Debo was fully healthy, I would still rather have Justin Jefferson, to be completely honest. But I would love to know your opinion if you think that having him as a top 3 wide receiver is a little too rich here. And now our next receiving option is going to be someone that we had to fix our rest of season rankings, and y'all know, earlier this season, I mean, we were giving him a unhealthy amount of disrespect. Deontay Johnson. Now, Deontay Johnson, I don't know what it is. I don't know why we have been disrespecting him. At least we were at the beginning part of the season. We moved him up to being a mid-wide receiver 2. I mean, just a couple months ago, around that bye week for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I think that even having him as that mid to high-end wide receiver 2, if anything, that's disrespectful as well. Because with Deontay Johnson, like, I feel like I'm being the most hypocritical person ever with every stance we've ever taken with Deontay. And what we always talk about, you chase the target share in that offense, and you don't really care too much about the efficiency. You ignore things like drops. I mean, you ignore wide receivers going out and having a low yards per target, knowing that's what's volatile season to season. And what's predictive going forward is the volume that player is going to get in the offense. Deontay Johnson, 120 targets so far this season through 11 weeks. Deontay Johnson has to be at the very top of the NFL with his targets per game. Now, of course, he's not going to be coming out here and giving you big plays with these targets. Of course, he's not going to have a very high touchdown rate. He's not going to have high yards per target, mainly just because this offense is so damn bad for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But this offense for the Steelers has been bad the entire season. And this offense for the Steelers being bad the entire season has still allowed Deontay Johnson to average damn near 11 targets a game. And in a full PPR format, this is someone that's currently sitting as the wide receiver 7 on a points per game basis. This past week against the Baltimore Ravens, he gets the spike week where, yes, he does drop 30 fantasy points. But to be honest with Deontay Johnson, nothing's really different here than what you've seen previously. With Deontay Johnson, I mean, he gets 11 targets, 8 receptions, 105 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. So those volatile touchdowns coming in and out one week, the next. I mean, that's not what we're looking for. But, I mean, this is just a continued trend of what we've had the entire month. I mean, going back against the Lions, 13 targets, 7 receptions, 83 receiving yards. Against the Chargers, 13 targets, 7 receptions, 101 receiving yards. Against the Bengals, 14 targets, 9 receptions, 95 receiving yards. Against the Ravens, 11 targets, 8 receptions, 105 receiving yards. This is the most consistent production you are finding from any wide receiver in terms of their targets, their yards, and their receptions outside of players like Cooper Kupp. I mean, even Devonte Adams has been less consistent than this. Of course, in a non-PPR format, you're not as excited about Deontay Johnson, but for a full PPR league, he has to be a wide receiver 1. It's embarrassing that we did not have him as a wide receiver 1 previously. Now, exactly where we move him, this is where I'm having a little bit of a conversation. I don't know if we can get him up in the same tier guys like Stephon Diggs. I don't think I could put him ahead of Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, who we'll be talking about one second here. Deontay Johnson, I'm going to be moving him up to our wide receiver 9 in our rest of season rankings. We have him directly ahead of CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, and DeAndre Hopkins. I would love to know your opinion on this. Maybe I'm just biased with a couple years ago. I mean, Deontay Johnson proving that he's the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh, not Juju Smith-Schuster. Putting that dagger in my heart. I don't know why, but we've had to move Deontay Johnson up a significant amount. disrespecting the man. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver. Let's go over to T. Higgins. And with T. Higgins here, thank God we get this breakout. I mean, with T. Higgins, so many people, a part of the flock, have T. Higgins on their rosters. I mean, just going and opening up that video premiere, you just get the chat going, Higgins, 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 spamming it down with everybody trading for him halfway through the year. And why did we trade him? The volume, the volume, the volume. When Jamar Chase was coming out having 200-yard receiving games and Jamar Chase was destroying T. Higgins in fantasy production, you're only getting, 5 receptions, 32 receiving yards for Higgins. We were coming out and saying this was still a wide receiver 1A, wide receiver 1B type situation in Cincinnati. T. Higgins was still the guy to buy low. Jamar Chase was that player to sell high. Now I'm saying this so y'all don't hate me when I go through and follow it up with the fact that Jamar Chase is still going to be the wide receiver 1 in Cincinnati. Now, I know a lot of people probably want to just come through and murder me for saying that after T. Higgins has had, last week, 8 targets, 6 receptions, 114 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. And this week, 14 targets, 9 receptions, 138 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. And you're looking at Jamar Chase at the same time. And Jamar Chase, hasn't been giving you anything close to that level of production over the past 2 weeks, where he's at 3 targets and 8 targets, totaling 10 fantasy points at best in that 2-week span. So please don't get too upset with me, but Jamar Chase is still going to be the wide receiver 1. I can't move T. Higgins ahead of him. I've been the guy screaming all season, sell high on Chase, buy low on Higgins. If anything, maybe it's the opposite scenario now, as I know a lot of people are kind of arguing with us over there on Patreon, and the fact that we need to have T. Higgins ahead of Jamar Chase. I would love to know your opinion on this. I'm just going to have a very hard time getting there. Still, if you're looking at the production on a per-game basis so far this season, Chase still is outproducing T. Higgins. And you would assume that the rookie wide receiver continues to get better as the season goes on. Jamar Chase is still the wide receiver 13 on a points per game basis. T. Higgins is still the wide receiver 22. So there is that gap. I don't want to be overreacting too much here in Cincinnati. Now with T. Higgins, I don't want to even talk about the role changing in Cincinnati or anything. These have been the exact roles they've had the entire time. Nothing's changed in Cincinnati. It's just wide receiver volatility. With Jamar Chase, you know that he's that field stretching option that's not going to be as consistent, getting to 12, 13 targets every week like Deontay Johnson, but he has the ceiling that those other players simply don't possess. So if you're looking at our rest of season rankings, we have moved Jamar Chase down to be the wide receiver 13. And with T. Higgins, we've always had him as a top 24 option. He was hovering around the wide receiver 18 beforehand. I'm not going to be overreacting at all to this. We liked Higgins before. I'm going to move him up to wide receiver 15. He's going to be jumping players like Hollywood Brown, Michael Pittman, Jalen Waddle. We're going to have him directly behind Jamar Chase and Amari Cooper. I think I could hear an argument to have T. Higgins ahead of Amari with Michael Gallup coming in Dallas. You know what? Actually, as we talk through this, I think if you look at the production as well as where the targets have been going in Dallas as of late, we can move T. Higgins up to the wide receiver 14, 1 spot ahead of Amari Cooper. I have T. Higgins on every single one of my own rosters. Please don't get too upset with me saying this. I just think that if you're going through and if you're just basing everything off the past 2 weeks, yes, maybe you come to the conclusion that Higgins is the wide receiver 1 in Cincinnati. I can't get there. They're both guys you're starting every single week regardless, so it doesn't really matter too much. Your trade deadline's already passed. It's just more so a talking point. And now our next wide receiver that we can talk about is going to be Chris Godwin. With Godwin, 2 weeks ago, disappointing. Didn't move him down in rankings at all because he has the same exact role that he's always seen. We're going to include Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Rob Gronkowski all on this list. Not necessarily because, you have them all popping off this past week. Now, of course, it's really nice to see Chris Godwin going out there and dropping 30 fantasy points. It's nice seeing 17 targets, 15 receptions, and 143 receiving yards at the same time. Of course, you love seeing that. You love seeing 2 receiving touchdowns for Rob Gronkowski. You love seeing Mike Evans get damn close to 100 yards receiving at the same time. Now, with all that being said, the reason that they're going to be moving up our rankings is the report that we had with Antonio Brown. And now with Antonio Brown, this is something that I got wrong. As soon as you add the COVID vaccine card, blah, 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 all that stuff coming out, I was saying I would imagine that we need to be more worried about the ankle injury rather than focusing in on all that drama, all the controversy that you have in Tampa. But now Antonio Brown is actually suspended from this. I had no idea what to expect, as we've been very transparent all season when it comes to the COVID protocols for the NFL. I mean, everything's brand new here. We have no history that we can look at. We can't go back to 2016 and see a similar wide receiver situation and how that played out in that instance. No, this is all just us learning. This is all just us kind of figuring out what's going to happen. And with Antonio Brown, I mean, not coming back until December 16th. I'm recording this December 6th. Antonio Brown going to be out 3 weeks here. That's going to give the massive bump up to Chris Godwin. That's going to give the massive bump up to Mike Evans. It's going to give the massive bump up to Rob Gronkowski. And that's because with Antonio Brown here, going back and looking at the production that we've had so far this season, Antonio Brown, I mean, he's been great in Tampa. I mean, going and looking at the past 3 weeks before, I mean, he had that ankle injury, 11 targets, 7 receptions, 63 receiving yards. I mean, he has a pop-off week against the Miami Dolphins, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 124 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. Against the Eagles, 13 targets, 9 receptions, 93 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown as well. Antonio Brown, so far this season, I mean, he has come out and he has averaged 19 fantasy points per game. He is averaging as many fantasy points per game as someone like Devonte Adams. Now, of course, you're not expecting that to maintain. Now, yes, that's off a very small sample, but that does kind of show you the role that you have in this offense from Antonio Brown. And if he is going to be just removed from this offense, I don't want to say permanently, but until, I mean, December 26th, that's just going to be giving a massive bump up to everybody else with their projected market share numbers. There's a big thing with Tampa is while Antonio Brown's been good, it's not like, I mean, Antonio Brown's removed from this offense, then all of a sudden, I mean, you're looking at a completely different team. It's not like Antonio Brown is removed from this offense and then the offensive pie just drastically shrinks because they can't move the ball down the field. I mean, we know with the Buccaneers, they're moving the ball down the field one way or another. It's just simply, does that go through Chris Godwin? Does that go through Mike Evans? Does it go through Antonio Brown? And one of those avenues getting shut means great news for everybody else. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver. I don't want to talk about him too much here. I know people are going to want to hear us discuss him. I don't really think there's anything to change. Hunter Renfrow. Now with Hunter Renfrow, if you're looking at our rest of season rankings, I know some people will be sad to see that we have him at wide receiver 22. Now this past week, yeah, he had a very strong game. He comes out, he has his career high in targets with 10 targets in this game, 9 receptions, and 102 receiving yards. With Hunter Renfrow, it's clear as day. When you don't have Darren Waller, when you don't have Henry Ruggs, that's removing about 15 targets out of this offense on a per game basis. Now, with Henry Ruggs being gone on his own right, I don't think that necessarily helps Hunter Renfrow greatly. But Darren Waller, the tight end, seeing 9 targets a game over the middle of the field as well, in a similar area that Hunter Renfrow operates, that's going to drastically increase the role for Hunter Renfrow. When you've gone through and you've seen the amount of targets that Bryan Edwards commands on a per snap basis, and you clearly can see that Bryan Edwards, despite what anybody in the Dynasty Fantasy Football community wants to tell you, Bryan Edwards simply is not talented. Bryan Edwards cannot generate separation. Bryan Edwards, I mean, we talked about this when he was coming out of South Carolina. He had the majority of that collegiate production off of wide receiver screens. That's not translating to the NFL level, as you should have expected. Whatever anybody told you in training camp, it's just laughable. That's besides the point. With Hunter Renfrow, he's the only option left. He's the only option left in Las Vegas. So every week that Darren Waller does not play, Hunter Renfrow is a high-end wide receiver 2 on a points per game basis. Now, I'm not going to be moving him up my rankings that much. As we've discussed, I have him as our wide receiver 22. I have him directly ahead of Mike Williams, A.J. Brown, and Brandon Ayuk in our rest of season rankings. Now, the reason for that is obviously Darren Waller will be back at some point this season. But please, don't just go through and assume that we are going to have Hunter Renfrow, the 10-target wide receiver, every single week going forward, because Darren Waller will come back. And now our next receiver, I talked about this in the lessons learned video. I know a lot of people aren't really going to see this one clearly, but let me explain myself. Michael Pittman. Now, yes, Michael Pittman didn't have a great game against the Houston Texans. I mean, we talked all week about the fact that this was going to be a game that they simply did not have to go out there and throw the ball because they were going up against the Houston Texans, and you were going to have Jonathan Taylor with 30 rush attempts, which is exactly what happened. But with Michael Pittman, I think there are reasons to get excited about the role that you saw in Indianapolis this week. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that he gets 33 rushing yards. Of course, that's a nice bonus. That's not something projectable going forward. What I am talking about is the fact that he comes out and he sees about half of the passing offense for the Indianapolis Colts. Now that is really big going forward, knowing that with Michael Pittman, if he is able to command half of that offense, of course that's not going to always happen, but if he's able to get up there to 30% of his team's target share, that's similar to what you get from wide receivers like Terry McLaurin. That's similar to what you get with guys like Devonte Adams. Now, of course, Terry McLaurin, I mean, you don't really like it because the offense that he's playing in, but Indianapolis looks like they're going to be able to move the ball down the field. Now, looking at where we actually moved Michael Pittman in our rest of season rankings, well, I can go through and I can talk about why I love this role that he has in Indianapolis and why I'm more impressed than I was a week ago. I don't know how much higher we can be moving him in our rest of season rankings. I'm going to have him in the same tier of wide receivers as Hollywood Brown, Terry McLaurin, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf. Now, exactly where he stacks up in that tier, I have not decided yet. And the reason for this is the schedule going forward for Michael Pittman. Because in week 14, he has a bye, so obviously you can't play him. In week 15, he's going up against the New England Patriots. Probably a spot to avoid. And then in week 16, he also has the Arizona Cardinals, who have surprisingly one of the best defenses in the NFL this season, which is not something you were expecting coming in. So with Pittman overall, I want to just give him a shout out this week saying this was a great role that you saw. I mean, I think you can be really excited about what you will have from an opportunity standpoint going forward. But to map out the exact matchups, I actually think that, yeah, with Michael Pittman, he's going to be hovering around wide receiver 19 in our rest of season rankings just because the bye and the matchups coming up. And now let's go over and let's talk about a tight end because y'all know we have to get a Dallas Goddard dance party going. Of course, we talked about this a little bit in the recap video for the week, but Dallas Goddard coming out and dropping the hammer, dropping damn near 30 fantasy points off of only 6 targets as well. 6 targets, 6 receptions, 105 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns at the same time. Now, I think with Dallas Goddard in particular, this is someone that you have to get excited about in that if you're looking at this passing offense, if we get Gardner Minshew going forward, which right now we have no report stuff. We're having to wait until we just kind of get news coming out of Philadelphia over the next week, which they're on bye, so maybe we're going to be waiting 2 weeks here. I think with Gardner Minshew, we have seen that he is going to elevate the entire passing offense. I don't want to say he's going to elevate the offense in general because we know Jalen Hurts can pick up rushing first downs. We know Jalen Hurts is a great quarterback in that way. But if we get Gardner Minshew as a more efficient passing quarterback than Jalen Hurts is, which he clearly demonstrated in the first half, and then this game got out of hand, and this Philadelphia Eagles team was able to just lean on the run. So really, we didn't see what we would want to at the end of the game. But if we get the boosted up passing efficiency going forward, I think you should be raising your expectations for Dallas Goddard. We've been talking about it since the Zach Ertz trade, but if you're looking at his snap rate, if you're looking at his target share in this offense, he's near the top of the NFL with his weighted opportunity for the tight end position in Philadelphia. And if this offense is going to get better, I mean, it's not like that opportunity is going to get smaller. It's just going to get more efficient. So I think you can be excited about Dallas Goddard. Now, of course, thank you so much for everybody checking out the video. If you have not done so already, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, letting me know what your record is right now. Subscribe to the channel. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day, and I hope I see y'all with the video tomorrow.